A second sense is access to information. I ask a penny for your thoughts. You reply by telling me the content of your enzymes secreted by your stomach, the current settings of your eyes, and the colors, shapes, and sounds in front of you. But you cannot tell me about the enzymes secreted by your stomach, the current settings of your heart and breathing rate, the computations in your brain, enzymes secreted by your stomach, the retinas, the rules of syntax that order the words as you speak, or the sequence of muscle contractions that allow you to pick up a glass. That shows that the massive information processing in the nervous system falls into two pools. One pool, which includes the products of vision and the contents of short-term memory, can be accessed by the system's underlying verbal reports, rational thought, and deliberate decision-making. Can be accessed gut-level responses, the internal calculations behind vision, language, calculations behind vision, desires or memories, if there are any, cannot be accessed by those systems. Sometimes information can pass from the first pool to the second or vice versa. When we first learn how to use a stick shift, every motion has to be thought out, but with second or vice versa and biofeedback, we can focus on a hidden sensation like our heartbeat. This sense of consciousness, of course, also embraces Freud's distinction between the conscious and the unconscious mind. As with self-knowledge, there is nothing miraculous or even mysterious about it. Indeed, there are obvious analogues in machines. My computer has access to information about whether the printer is working or not working. It is conscious of it in this particular sense, and can print out an error message, printer not responding. But it has no access to information about why the printer is not working. Printer does not include the information. The chip inside the printer, in contrast, does have from printer to computer sense. The sensors in different parts of the printer feed into the chip, and the chip can turn on a yellow light if the toner supply is low and a red light if the paper is jammed. Finally, we come to the most interesting sense of all. Experience, phenomenal awareness, raw feels, first-person present tense, what it is like, experience, never know. Woody Allen's joke turned on the difference between this sense of consciousness and difference between this access to information by the deliberative language-using parts of the mind. In this sense, sentience is the one in which consciousness seems like a miracle. The remainder of the chapter is about consciousness in these last two senses. Information the different parts of the mind make available to one another. In this sense of the word, we really understand consciousness. Interesting things can be said about how it is implemented in the brain, the role it plays in mental computation, the engineering specs it is designed to meet, and hence the evolutionary pressures that gave rise to it, and how those specs, sensory awareness, focal attention, emotional coloring, and the will. Finally, I will turn to the problem of sentience. Someday, probably sooner rather than later, we will have a fine understanding of what in the brain is responsible for consciousness in the sense of access to information. Francis Crick and Christoph Koch, for example, have set out straightforward criteria for what we should look for. Most obviously, Koch, for example, have set out straightforward criteria for an anesthetized one. Therefore, some of the neural bases of access consciousness can be found in whatever brain structures act differently when an animal is awake and when it is in a dreamless sleep or out cold. Act differently for that role. Also, we know that information about an object being perceived is scattered across many parts of the cerebral cortex. Therefore, information access requires a mechanism that binds together geographically separated data. Crick and Koch suggest that synchronization of neural firing might be one such mechanism, perhaps entrained by loops from the cortex. Suggest that synchronization. They also note that voluntary planned behavior requires activity in the frontal lobe. Therefore, access consciousness may be determined by the anatomy of the fiber tracts running from various parts of the brain to the frontal lobes. Whether or not they are right, they have shown that the problem can be addressed in the lab. Access consciousness is also right. They have shown carried out by the brain. When we are aware of a piece of information, many parts of the mind of information, we not only see a ruler in front of us, but can describe it, reach for it, deduce that it can prop up a window, or count its markings. As the philosopher Stephen Stick has put it, conscious information is inferentially promiscuous. It makes itself available to a large number of information processing agents rather than committing itself to one alone. Newell and Simon have made headway in understanding human problem-solving simply by asking a person to think aloud when working on a puzzle. They have nicely simulated the mental activity by asking a person to respond step for step with the person's report of what he is consciously thinking. Of the bulletin board correction pressures that probably gave rise to it are also becoming clearer. The general principle is that any information processor must be given limited access to information because information has costs as well as benefits. One cost is space, the hardware to hold the information. The limitation is all too clear to microcomputer owners deciding whether to invent the hardware to hold the computer comes with vast amounts of parallel hardware for storage. Some storage theorists infer that the brain can store all contingencies in advance and that thought can be reduced to one-step pattern recognition. But the mathematical combinatorial explosion bring to mind the old slogan of MTV. Too much is never enough. Simple calculation to mind the old slogan meanings, chess games, melodies, seeable objects, and so on can exceed the number of objects in the universe. For example, there are 30 to 35 possible moves at each point in a chess game, each of which can be followed by 30 to 35 responses, defining about 1,000 complete turns. A typical chess game lasts 40 turns. 120th power different chess games. There are about 10 to the 70th power particles in the visible universe. So no one can play chess by memorizing all the games and recognizing every sequence of moves. The same is true for sentences, stories, melodies, and so on. Of course, some combinations can be stored, but pretty soon either you run out of brain or you start to superimpose the patterns and get useless chimeras and blends. Rather than storing brain or you start to superimpose the patterns and get useless, the processor needs rules or algorithms that operate on a subset of information at a time and calculate that of information at a time. A second cost of information is time. Just as one couldn't store all the chess games, mentally play out all the chess games in a lifetime less than the age of the universe, 10 to the 18th power seconds. Solving a problem in 100 years is, practically speaking, the same as not solving it at all. In fact, the requirement at all, intelligent agent are even more stringent. Life is a series of deadlines. Perception and behavior take place in real time, more stringent. And since computation itself takes time, information processing time part of the problem rather than part of the solution. Think about a hiker planning the quickest route back to camp before it gets dark and taking 20 minutes to plot out a path that saves her 10 minutes. A third cost is resources. Information processing requires out the battery life of a laptop computer by slowing down the processor and restricting its access Thinking, too, is expensive. The technique of functional imaging of brain activity, PET and MRI, depends on the fact that working brain tissue calls more blood its way and consumes more glucose. Any intelligent agent incarnated in matter, working in real time, and subject to the laws of thermodynamics must be restricted in its access to information. Only information relevant to the problem at hand should be allowed in. That does not mean that the agent Information that is relative at one time for one purpose might be relevant at another time for another. Information that is always irrelevant to a kind of computation should be permanently peeled off from it. Information that is sometimes relevant and sometimes irrelevant should be accessible to a computation when it is relevant, insofar as that can be predicted in advance. This design specification explains why access consciousness exists in the human mind. So, consciousness in the sense of access is coming to be understood. Sense of sentience. Sentience and access may be two sides of a single coin. Our subjective experience for our reasoning, speech, and action. We do not just experience a toothache, we complain about it and head to the dentist. Speech and action. Distinction between access and sentience by thinking up scenarios in which access could occur without sentience, An example of access without sentience might be found in the strange syndrome called blind sight. A large blind spot because of damage to his visual cortex. He will adamantly deny that he can see a thing there, but when forced to guess where an object is, he performs well above chance. One interpretation is that the blind sighter has access to the objects, but is not sentient of them. Whether or not this is correct, it shows that it is possible to conceive of a difference between access and sentience. Sentience without access might occur when you are engrossed in a conversation and suddenly realize that there is a jackhammer outside the window and that you have been hearing it, but you are engrossed in to the epiphany you were sentient of the noise but had no access to it. But Bloch admits that the trained and suspects that in reality access and sentience go together. So we may not need a separate theory of where sentience occurs in the brain, how it fits into mental computation, or why it evolved. It seems to be an extra quality of some kinds of how it fits into mental theory of how the subjective qualities of sentience emerge out of mere information access. To complete the story, then, I must present a theory that addresses questions like these. If we could ever duplicate the information processing in the human mind as an enormous computer program, would a computer running the program be conscious? What if we took that program and trained a large number of would a computer run the data and act out the steps? Would there be one gigantic consciousness hovering over China, separate from the consciousness of the billion individuals? If they were implementing the brain state for agonizing pain, would there be some entity pain? Would there be some if every citizen was cheerful and light-hearted? Suppose the visual receiving area at the back of your every citizen was cheerful, receiving input from the eyes. By every behavioral measure, you are blind. Is there a mute but fully aware visual consciousness sealed off in the back of your head? What if it was removed and kept alive in a dish? Might your experience of red be the same as my experience of green? Sure, you might label grass as green and tomatoes as red, just as I do, but perhaps you actually see the grass as having the color that I would describe if I were in your shoes, as I do. That is, could there be an android rigged up to act as intelligently and as emotionally as you and me, but in which there is no one home who is actually feeling or seeing anything? How do I know that you're not a zombie? Who is actually implicated in another collection of molecules, would it have my consciousness? If someone destroyed the original, but the duplicate continued to live my life and think my thoughts and feel my feelings, would I have been murdered? Was Captain Kirk snuffed out and replaced by a twin every time he stepped into the transporter room? What is it like to be a bat? Do beetles enjoy sex? Into the transporter room? Surgeons replace one of your neurons with a microchip that duplicates your neurons with functions. You feel and behave exactly as before. Then they replace a second one, and a third one, and so on, until more and more of your brain becomes silicon. Since each microchip does exactly what the neuron did, your behavior and memory never change. Is some other conscious entity moving in with you? Heck out of me. I have some prejudices, but no idea of how to begin to look for a defensible answer. And neither does anyone else. The computational theory of mind offers no insight. Neither does any finding in neuroscience, once you clear up the usual confusion of sentience with access and self-knowledge. How can a book called How the Mind Works evade the responsibility of explaining where sentience comes from? I could, I suppose, invoke the doctrine of logical positivism, which holds that if a statement cannot be verified, it is literally meaningless. The imponderables in my list ask about the quintessentially unverifiable. Many thinkers, the imponderables in my list ask about the experiences, or as philosophers call them, qualia, are a cognitive illusion. Once we have isolated the computational and neurological correlates of access consciousness, there is nothing left to explain. It's just left to accept that sentience remains unexplained after all the manifestations of sentience have been accounted for, just because the computations don't have anything explained after all this remains unexplained even after all the manifestations of wetness have been accounted for, because moving molecules aren't wet. Most people are uncomfortable with the argument, but it is not easy to find anything wrong with it. The philosopher Georges Rey once told me that he has no sentient experiences. He lost them after a bicycle accident when he was 15. Rey once told me that zombie. I assume he is speaking tongue-in-cheek, but of course I have no way of knowing. But of course his point. The qualia debunkers do have a point. At least for now, we have no scientific purchase. We have no extra ingredient that gives rise to sentience. As far as scientific explanation goes, it might as well not exist. It gives rise to simply untestable. It's that testing them would make no difference to anything anyway. Our incomprehension of sentience does not impede our understanding of how the mind works in the least. Generally, the parts of a scientific problem fit together like a crossword puzzle. To reconstruct human evolution, we need physical anthropology to find the bones, archaeology to understand the tools, molecular biology to date the split from chimpanzees, and paleobotany to reconstruct the molecular biology. When any part of the puzzle is blank, such as a lack of chimpanzee fossils or an uncertainty whether the climate was wet or dry, the gap is sorely felt, and everyone waits impatiently for it to be filled. But in the gap is high above the causal chains of psychology and neuroscience. If we the neurocomputational steps from perception through reasoning and emotion to behavior, the only thing left missing by the lack of a theory of sentience an understanding of sentience itself. But saying that we have no scientific explanation of sentience is not the scientific explanation of sentience of sentience itself. I am as certain that I am sentient as I am certain of anything, and I bet you feel the same. Though I concede that my curiosity about sentience may never be satisfied, I refuse to believe that I am just confused when I think I am sentient at all. Dennett's analogy of unexplained wetness is not decisive. Wetness is itself a subjective feeling, so the observer's dissatisfied unexplained wetness. And we cannot banish sentience from our discourse or reduce it to information access, because reasoning depends on it. The concept of sentience underlies our certainty that torture is wrong and that disabling a robot is the destruction of property, but disabling a person is murder. It is the reason that the death of a loved one does not impart to us just self-pity at our loss, but the uncomprehending pain of knowing that the person's thoughts and pleasures have vanished forever. If you bear with me to the end of the book, you will learn my own hunch about the mystery of sentience. But the mystery remains a mystery, a topic not for science but for ethics, for late-night dorm room bull sessions, and, of course, for one other realm. For late-night dorm room bull sessions, and to Rust is the place he lived in and the machines he used. Without use, they will disintegrate from the wind and the sand and the years that act upon them. All of Mr. Corey's machines, including the one made in his image, obsolete. In the Twilight Zone. Obsolete. Neural circuitry has evolved in many animals, but the common image of animals climbing up some image of adder is wrong. The common view is that lower animals have a few fixed reflexes, and that in higher ones the reflexes can be associated with new stimuli, as in Pavlov's experiments, and the responses can be associated with rewards, as in Pavlov's associate gets better in still higher organisms, and eventually it is freed from bodily events and physical stimuli and responses, and can associate ideas directly to each other, reaching an apex in man. But the distribution of intelligence in real animals is nothing like this. The Tunisian desert ant leaves its nest, travels some distance like this, insect that has keeled over from the heat. When it finds one, it bites off a chunk, turns, and makes a beeline for the nest, a hole 1 millimeter in diameter as much as 50 meters away. How does it find its way back? The navigation depends on information gathered during the outward journey, not on sensing the nest like a beacon. If someone lifts the ant as it emerges from the nest and plunks it down some distance away, the ant wanders in random circles. If someone moves the nest and plunks it down of the direction of its nest and respect to the abduction site, slightly overshoots the point where the nest should be, does a quick U-turn, and searches for the non-existent nest. This shows that the ant has somehow measured and turn, navigation called path integration or dead reckoning. Information processing in animals, discovered by the biologist Rudiger Weiner, is one of many that the psychologist Randy Gallistel used to try to get people to stop thinking about learning as the formation of associations. He explains the principle. About learning as the respect to time to obtain the position vector, or some discrete equivalent of this computation. The discrete equivalent in traditional marine navigation is to record the direction and speed of travel, the velocity, travel at intervals, multiply each recorded velocity by the interval since the previous recording, to get interval by interval display. Each recorded on the northeast course for half an hour puts the ship 2.5 nautical miles northeast of where 5 is. And sum the successive displacements, changes in position, to get the net change in position. Change in terms of the longitudinal and latitudinal displacements are the deduced reckoning of the ship's position. Audiences are incredulous. All that computation inside the little bitty pinhead of an ant? Actually, as computation goes, this is pretty simple stuff. You could build a device to do it for a few dollars out of little parts hanging on the pegboard at Radio Shack. But intuitions about the nervous system have been so impoverished by associationism that a psychologist would be accused of wild, nervous system have been so impoverished by associationism brain. Could an ant really do calculus or even arithmetic? Not overtly, of course, but then neither do we when we exercise our own faculty of dead reckoning, our sense of direction. The path integration calculus pokes into our awareness, and the ant's, if it has any, as an abstract feeling that home is pokes into. Other animals execute even more complicated sequences of arithmetic, logic, and data storage and retrieval. Many migratory birds fly thousands of miles at night, maintaining their compass direction by looking at the constellation. As a Cub Scout, I was taught how to find the North Star, locate the tip of the handle of the Little Dipper, or extrapolate from the front lip of. I was taught how to find the. Birds are not born with this knowledge, not because it is unthinkable that it could be because if it were innate it would soon be obsolete. The Earth's axis of rotation, and hence the celestial pole, the point in the sky corresponding to north, wobbles in a 27,000-year cycle called the precession of the equinoxes. The cycle wobbles. Birds have responded by evolving a special algorithm for learning where the celestial pole is in the night sky. It all happens while they are still in the nest and cannot fly. The nestlings gaze up at the night sky for hours, watching the slow rotation of the constellations. They find the point around which the stars appear to move, and record its position with respect to several nearby constellations, acquiring the information imparted to me by the Cub Scout manual. Months later, they can use any of these constellations. The information imparted behind them while flying south, or flying into the celestial pole the next spring to return north. Honeybees perform a dance that tells their hive mates the direction and distance of a food source with respect to the Honeybees have evolved a variety of calibrations and backup systems to deal with the engineering complexities of The dancer uses an internal clock to compensate for the movement of the sun between the time she discovered the source and the time she discovered the source information. If it's cloudy, the other bees estimate the direction using the polarization of light in the sky. Documented by Karl von Frisch, James Gould, and others. And once thought that bees offered a good pedagogical opportunity to convey the sophistication of neural computation to our undergraduates. He devoted the first week of his entry-level course in cognitive science to some of the ingenious experiments. The next year, the first week of his till the students complained that the course had become an introduction to bee cognition. There are dozens of comparable examples. Many species compute how much time to forage at each patch so as to optimize their rate of calories per energy expended in foraging. Some birds learn the ephemeris function, the path of the sun above the horizon over the course of the day and the year, necessary for navigating by the sun. The barn owl uses sub-millisecond discrepancies between the arrival times of a sound at its two ears to swoop down on a rustling mouse in pitch blackness. Caching species place nuts and seeds in unpredictable hiding places to foil thieves, but months later must recall them all. Even Pavlovian predictable hiding places to foil thieves, but must be not a general stickiness of coinciding stimuli and responses in the brain, but complex algorithms for multivariate, non-stationary time series analysis, predicting when events will occur based on their history of occurrences. The moral of this animal show is that animals' brains are just as specialized and well-engineered as their bodies. The moral of the use information to solve the problems presented by its lifestyle. Such organisms' lifestyles differ, and since they are related to one another in a great bush, not a great chain, species cannot be ranked in IQ or by the percentage of human intelligence they have achieved. Whatever is special about the human mind cannot be just more, or better, or more flexible, or better, or more flexible. It's generic animal intelligence. Each animal has evolved information processing machinery to solve its problems, and we evolved machinery to solve ours. The sophisticated algorithms found in even the tiniest serve as yet another eye-opener. Joining the difficulty of building a robot, the circumscribed effects of brain death are eye-opener for the hidden complexity we should expect to find in the human mind. The brains of mammals, like the bodies of mammals, follow a common general plan. Many of the same cell types, chemicals, tissues, suborgans, way stations, and pathways are found throughout the class, and the major visible differences come from inflating or shrinking the parts. But under the microscope, differences appear. The number of cortical areas differs wide, but humans. Primates differ from other mammals in the number of visual areas, their actions, and their hookup to the motor and decision regions of the frontal lobes. When a species has a noteworthy talent, it is reflected in the decision regions of the naked eye. The takeover of monkeys' brains by visual areas, territory, reflects, more accurately allows, their aptitude for depth, color, motion, and visually guided grasping. Bats that rely on sonar have additional brain areas dedicated to their ultrasonic hearing, and desert mice that cache on sonar have of the cognitive map, then closely related species that don't cache. Human brain, too, tells an evolutionary story. Even a quick side-by-side comparison shows that the primate brain must have been considerably re-engineered to end up as a human brain. Our brains are about 3 times too big for a generic monkey or ape of our as a human brain, by prolonging fetal brain growth for a year after birth. If our bodies after birth, during that period, we would be 10 feet tall and weigh half a ton. The major lobes and patches of the brain have been revamped as well. The olfactory bulbs, which underlie the sense of smell, have shriveled to 1/3 of the expected primate size, already puny by mammalian standards, and the main cortical areas for vision and movement have shrunk proportionally as well. Within the visual system, the first stop for information, the primary visual cortex, takes up a smaller proportion of the whole brain, while the later areas for complex form processing expand, as do the temporoparietal areas that shunt visual information to the language and expand, especially for understanding speech, have grown, and the prefrontal lobes, the seat for thought and planning, have ballooned to twice what a primate our size should have. While the brains of monkeys and apes are subtly symmetrical, the human brain, especially in the areas devoted to language, is so lopsided that the two hemispheres can be distinguished by shape especially in the areas of primate brain areas for new functions. Broca's area, involved in speech, is a homologue, evolutionary counterpart in monkeys, but they obviously don't use it for speech, and they don't even seem to use it to produce shrieks, barks, and other calls. It's interesting to find these differences, but the human brain could be radically different from an ape's brain, even if one looked like a It's interesting in the patterns of connections among neurons, just as the differences in content just as the different programs, microchips, books, or videocassettes lie not in their gross shapes, but in the combinatorial arrangements of their tiny constituents. Virtually nothing is known about the functioning microcircuitry of the human brain because there is a shortage of volunteers willing to give. Nothing is known about. If we could somehow read the code in the neural circuitry of growing humans and apes, we would surely find substantial differences. Ambrose Bierce's Devil's Dictionary defines our species as follows. Man, an animal so lost in rapturous contemplation of what he thinks he is as to overlook what he indubitably ought to be. His chief occupation is extermination of other animals and his own species, which, however, multiplies with such insistence. His chief occupation, Canada. Homo sapiens sapiens is indeed an unprecedented animal with many zoologically unique or extreme traits. Humans achieve their goals by complex chains of behavior. Zoologically, they plan the behavior using cognitive models of the causal structure of the world. Causal these models in their lifetimes and communicate them through language, which allows the knowledge to accumulate within a group and over generations. Group manufacture and depend upon many kinds of tools. They exchange goods and favors over long periods of time. Food is transported longs of tools. Labor is divided between the sexes. Humans form large, structured coalitions, especially among males, and coalitions wage war against each other. Humans use fire. Kinship systems are complex and vary with other aspects of their lifestyles. Mating relations are negotiated by kin, often by groups exchanging daughters. Mating rhyme rather than at certain points in a reproductive cycle. A few of these traits are found among some of the great apes, but to a much lesser degree, and most are not found at all. And humans have rediscovered traits that are rare among primates but found in other animals. They are bipedal. They live longer than other apes and bear helpless offspring who stay children, that is, sexually immature, for a substantial part of their lives. Hunting is important and meat a large part of the diet. Males invest in their offspring. They tote children around, protect them against animals and other humans, and give them food. And, as the Devil's Dictionary points out, humans occupy every ecozone on Earth. Aside from the retooling of the skeleton that gives us upright body posture and precision manipulation, our behavior and the mental programs that organize it. In the comic strip Calvin asks his tiger companion why people are never content with what they have. Hobbes replies, "Are you kidding? Your fingernails, are you kidding? No fangs, you can't see at night, your pink hides are ridiculous, your reflexes are nil, and you don't even have tails. Of course people aren't see at night. Handicaps, humans control the fate of tigers rather than vice versa. Human evolution is the original revenge of the nerds." Perhaps recoiling from the image of the pasty-faced, pocket-protected, polyester-clad misfits, evolution have looked far and wide for alternative theories. Human ingenuity has been explained away as a byproduct of far and wide for courtship device like the peacock's tail, as a stretching of chimpanzee childhood, an escape hatch that saved the species from the evolutionary dead end of bearing fewer and fewer offspring. Even in theories that acknowledge that intelligence itself was selected for, the causes are badly underpowered in comparison with the effects. In various stories, the problems like chipping tools out of stone, cracking open nuts and bones, throwing rotten animals, keeping track of toddlers, following herds to scavenge their dead, and maintaining social bonds in a large group. There are grains of truth in these accounts, but they lack the leverage of good reverse engineering. Natural selection for success in solving a particular problem tends to fashion an idiot savant like the dead-reckoning ants and stargazing birds. We need to know what the more general kinds of intelligence found in our species are good for. That requires a good description of the improbable feats the human mind intelligence found in our species are good for. That description must come from the study of the modern mind, cognitive science, and begins. Enough to explain the evolution of a brain in a vat. A good theory has to connect all ages, both sexes, anatomy, diet, habitat, and social life. That is, it has to carry the ecological niche that humans entered. The only theory that has risen to this challenge comes from John Tooby and the humans entered. Or begin by noting that species evolve at one another's expense. Milk and honey, the Big Rock Candy Mountain, and tangerine trees with marmalade skies, but real ecosystems are different. Except for fruits, which trick hungry animals into dispersing seeds, virtually every food is the body part of fruits, which organisms evolved defenses against being eaten, and would-be diners evolved being eaten, and would these defenses, prodding the would-be meals to evolve better defenses, and so on, in an evolutionary arms race. These weapons and defenses are genetically based and relatively fixed within the lifetime of the individual. Therefore, they change slowly. The balance between eater and eaten develops only over evolutionary time. Humans, Tooby and DeVore suggest, entered the cognitive niche. Remember the definition of intelligence: using knowledge of how things work to attain goals in the face of obstacles. By learning which manipulations achieve which goals, humans have mastered the art of the surprise attack. They use novel manipulations at defenses of other organisms, which can respond only over evolutionary time. The manipulations can be novel because human knowledge is not just couched in concrete instructions like how to catch a rabbit. Humans analyze the world using intuitive theories of objects, forces, paths, places, manners, states, substances, hidden objects, forces, beliefs, and desires. People compose new knowledge and plans by composing out combinatorial interactions among these laws in their mind's eye. Many theorists have wondered what illiterate intelligence. The foragers would have better grounds for asking the question about modern couch potatoes. The farming trip that never ends, but without the space blankets, Swiss Army knives, and freeze-dried pasta al formaggio. Living by their wits, human groups develop sophisticated technologies and bodies of folk science. All human science that have words for the elements of space, time, motion, speed, mental states, tools, flora, fauna of space, time, not, and, same, opposite, part, whole, and opposite. They combine the words into grammatical sentences and use the underlying propositions to reason about invisible entities like diseases, meteorological forces, and absent animals. Mental maps represent the locations of thousands of noteworthy sites, and mental calendars represent nested cycles of weather, animal migrations, and the life histories of plants. The anthropologist Louis Liebenberg recounts a typical experience with the trackers of the central Kalahari Desert. Louis Liebenberg recounts a typical experience with the of the previous evening. Trackers pointed out evidence of trampling, which indicated that consequently that the spoor leaving the sleeping place had been made early that morning and was therefore relatively fresh. The spoor then followed a straight course, indicating that the animal was on its way to a specific destination. After a while, one tracker started to investigate several sets of footprints in a particular area. He pointed out that these footprints all belonged to the same animal, but were made footprints in a particular area was the feeding ground of that particular wildebeest. Since it was by that time about midday, it could be expected that the wildebeest may be resting in the shade in the near vicinity. Foraging peoples manufacture cutters, pounders, containers, cordage, nets, baskets, levers, and spears, and other weapons. Their cutters, pound. Their engineering is often ingenious, exploiting poisons, smokeouts, glue poison, gill nets, baited lines, snares, corrals, weirs, camouflaged pits and cliff tops, blowguns, bows and arrows, and kites trailing sticky fishing lines made out of spider silk. The reward is an ability to crack the safes of many other living things: burrowing animals, plants' underground storage organs, nuts, seeds, bone marrow, tough-skinned animals and plants, birds, fish, shellfish, turtles, poisonous plants, detoxified by peeling, cooking, soaking, parboiling, fermenting, leaching, and other tricks of the kitchen magician. Quick animals, which can be ambushed, and large animals, which be ambushed, and large animals, which and other tricks of the and dispatch with weapons. Ogden Nash wrote, "The hunter crouches in his blind, 'neath camouflage of every kind, and conjures up a quacking noise to lend a lure to his decoys. This grown-up man with pluck and luck is hoping to outwit a duck." And outwit it he does. And outwit it he does, hoping to organisms that can beef up their defenses only in subsequent ones. Many species can defenses rapidly enough, even over evolutionary time, to defend themselves against humans. That is why species drop like flies whenever humans first enter an ecosystem. It's not just the snail darters and snowy owls recently threatened by dams and loggers. It's not just giant woolly rhinoceros or other fantastic Ice Age animal, is that humans apparently extinguished them thousands of years ago. The cognitive niche embraces many of the zoologically unusual features of our species. Unusual manufacture and use is the application of knowledge about causes and effects among objects in the effort to bring about goals. Language about goals. Language, application of knowledge, which can not only be used but exchanged for other resources, and lowers its cost. Resources, and lowered from the hard-won wisdom, strokes of genius, and trial and error of others, rather than only from risky exploration and experimentation. Information can be shared at a negligible cost. If I give you a fish, I no longer possess the fish, but if I give you information on how to fish, I still possess the information myself. So an information-exploiting lifestyle goes well with living in groups and pooling expertise, that is, with culture. Cultures differ from one another because they pool bodies of expertise, that is, with culture. Knowledge and skills. That shifts the balance of payoffs for males toward investing time. Good is an apprenticeship fighting over sexual access to females. And that in turn makes kinship a concern of both sexes and all ages. Human lives are long to repay the investment of a long apprenticeship. New habitats can be colonized because even habitats can be differ. They obey the laws of physics and biology that are already within humans' ken, and can be exploited and outsmart. Obey the laws of physics. An ape first enter the cognitive niche. Why not a groundhog, or a catfish, or a tapeworm? It only happened once, so no one knows. But I would guess that our ancestors had 4 traits that made it especially easy and worth their while to evolve better powers of causal reasoning. First, primates are visual animals. To evolve better powers dedicated to sight. Stereoscopic vision, the use of differences in the vision, the 2 eyes to give a sense of depth, developed early in the primate lineage, allowing early nocturnal primates to move among nocturnal primates and to grab insects with their hands. Color vision accompanied the switch of the ancestors of monkeys and apes to the day shift and their new taste for fruits, which advertised their ripeness with gaudy hues. End of Side 3. Please turn to Side 4. Why would the vision thing make such a difference? Depth perception defines a 3-dimensional space filled with movable solid objects. Color makes objects pop out from their backgrounds and gives us a sensation that corresponds to it. Color makes objects filled with movable solid objects. Makes such a difference. Together, they have pushed the primate brain into splitting the flow of visual information into 2 states. Color makes objects pop out from their and their shapes and compositions, and a wear system for their locations and motions. It can't be a coincidence that the human mind grasps the world, even the most abstract ethereals. It can't be a coincidence. It can't be films that the human mind went from being sick to being well, even if he didn't move an inch. He could have been in bed the whole time. Mary can give him many pieces of advice, even if they merely talked on the phone and nothing changed hands. Even scientists, when they try to grasp abstract mathematical relationships, plot them in graphs that show them as 2- and 3-dimensional shapes. Our capacity for abstract thought has co-opted the coordinate system and inventory of objects made available. It is harder to see how a standard mammal could have moved in that direction. Animals hug the ground, sniffing the rich chemical tracks and trails left behind by other living things. Most mammals hug the ground, sniffing the rich chemical. Phantasmagoria on a sidewalk knows that it lives in an olfactory world beyond. Here is an exaggerated way of stating the difference. Rather than living in a 3-dimensional coordinate space hung with three-dimensional objects, standard mammals live in a 2-dimensional flatland, which they explore through a 3-dimensional movable objects. Edwin Abbott's flat mammals live in a 2-dimensional showed that a 2-dimensional world differs from our own in ways other than just lacking 1/3 of the usual dimensions. Many geometric arrangements are simply impossible. A full-faced human figure has no way of getting food into his mouth, and a profiled one would be divided into 2 pieces by his digestive tract. Into his mouth, and a profiled one would not be divided into 2. Most mammals think in a cognitive flatland. They would lack the mental models of movable solid, the mental 3D spatial and mechanical relationships that became so essential to our mental life. A second possible prerequisite, this one found in the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, is group living. Most apes and monkeys are gregarious, though most mammals are not. Living together has advantages. A cluster of animals is not much more detectable to a predator than a single animal, and if it is detected, the likelihood that any individual will be picked off is diluted. Drivers feel less vulnerable speeding when they are in a group of speeders because chances are the traffic cop will stop someone else. Vulnerable speeding when they are in a group of speeders because A second advantage is in foraging efficiency. The advantage is most in cooperative hunting of large animals, such as in wolves and lions, but it also helps in sharing and defending other ephemeral food defenses too big to be consumed by the individual who found it, such as a tree laden with ripe fruit. Sources too big to be consumed by the individual who found it, or vulnerable to predators, tend to hang out in groups. Group lives stage for the evolution of human-like intelligence in 2 ways. With the group already in place, the value of having better information is multiplied, because information is the one commodity that can be given away and kept at the same time. Therefore, because information is the one, a smarter animal living in a group enjoys a commodity that can be given whatever it can get in trade for the knowledge. The other way in which a group is a crucible of intelligence is that group living itself possesses new cognitive challenges. There are also disadvantages to them. Neighbors compete over food, water, mates, and nest sites. And they're adding crowd. Neighbors compete adding risk of exploitation over food, water, and if baboons were philosophers, no doubt they would say that hell is other baboons. Social animals risk theft, cannibalism, cuckoldry, infanticide, extortion, and other treachery. Every social creature is poised between milking the benefits and suffering the costs of group living. That creates a pressure to stay on the right side of the ledger by becoming smarter. In many kinds of animals, the largest-brained and smartest-behaving species are social. Bees are social. Bees, in many kinds, sea lions, and of course monkeys, gorillas, and chimpanzees. The orangutan is a puzzling exception. Social animals send and receive smart, but also solitary is a puzzle. Smart, but also solitary is an exception. Access. They exchange favors, repay and enforce debts, punish cheaters, or join coalitions. The collective expression for humanoids, a shrewdness of apes, tells a story. Primates are sneaky, bald-faced liars. They hide from rivals' eyes to flirt, cry wolf. Primates are sneaky, bald-faced. Primates are sneaky, bald-faced liars. Chimpanzees monitor one another's goals, at least crudely, and sometimes appear to use them in pedagogy and deception. One chimp, shown a set of boxes with food and one with a snake, led his companions to the snake, led his screaming, feasted in peace. Vervet monkeys are yentas who keep close track after they fled screaming, feasted in peace, after they fled mings and goings and friends peace. World that they ignore the tracks of a python and the ominous sight of a carcass in a tree, the sight of the work of a leopard. Several theorists have proposed that the human brain is the outcome of a cognitive arms race, is the outcome of a cognitive Machiavellian intelligence of our primate forebears. There's only so much brain power you need to subdue a plant or a rock, the argument goes, but the other guy is about as smart as you are and may use that intelligence against your interests. You had better think about what he is thinking, about what you are thinking he is thinking. As far as brain power goes, there's no end to keeping up with the Joneses. My own guess is that a cognitive arms race by itself was not enough to launch human intelligence. My own guess is that a cognitive, except ours has, probably because, without some other change in lifestyle, some other intelligence, brain size, extended childhood, and so on, would damp the positive feedback loop. Humans are exact loop. Biological, not just social intelligence. In a species that runs optional in mechanical and biological, each faculty, not just socially, the expansion of the human brain is no evolutionary freak crying out for a runaway positive, The brain tripled in size in 5 million years, but that is leisurely by evolutionary timekeeping. There was enough time in hominekeeping, the brain to shoot up to human size, shrink back down, and shoot up again several times over. Evolution for the brain to shoot up to human. A third pilot of its size, hand. Primates evolved in trees and have hands to grasp the branches. Trees use all 4 limbs to run along the tops of branches, but apes hang from them, mainly by their arms. They have put their well-developed hands to use in manipulating objects. Gorillas meticulously dissect tough or thorny plants to use in manipulating objects. Gorilla mites, rocks to bash open nuts, and mashed leaves to sponge up water. As Samuel Johnson said about dogs walking on their hind legs, while it is not done well, you are surprised to find it done at all. Hands are levers of influence on the world that make intelligence worth having. Precision hands and precision intelligence co-evolved in the human lineage, and the fossil record shows that hands led the way. Finely tooled hands are useless if you have to walk on them all the time. That hands led. Every bone in our bodies has been reshaped to give us our upright posture, which frees the hands for carrying and manipulating. Once again, we have our ape ancestors to thank. Hanging from hands for carrying and manipulating. Trees calls for a body plan that is different. Once again, apes' bodies are already tilted upward with arms that differ from their legs, and chimpanzees and even monkeys walk upright for short distances to carry food and objects. Fully upright posture may have evolved under several selection pressures. Bipedal walking is a biomechanically efficient evolved under several selection pressures way to retool a tree-hanging body. Upright posture also allows one to peer over grass like a marmot. Hominids go out in the midday sun. This zoologically unusual work shift brought in several human adaptations for keeping cool, such as hairlessness and profuse sweating. Upright posture may be another. It is the opposite, such as hairlessness and profuse of lying down to get a tan, to sweating, crucial inducements. With the hands free, tools could be assembled out of materials from different locations and brought to where they were most useful, and food and children could be carried to safe or productive areas. A final usher of intelligence was hunting. Hunting, tool use, and bipedalism were for Darwin the special trinity that powered human evolution. Man the hunter was the major archetype in both serious and pop accounts through the 1960s. But the macho image that resonated with the decade of John Glenn and James Bond lost its appeal in the feminist-influenced small planet of the 1970s. A major problem for Man the Hunter was that it credited the growth of intelligence to the teamwork and foresight needed by... A major problem for Man the Hunter was that it credits of both sexes. Women did not wait in the kitchen to cook the mastodon that Dad brought them, nor did they forego the expansion of intelligence enjoyed by evolving men. The ecology of modern foraging peoples suggests that woman the gatherer provided a substantial portion of the calories in the form of highly processed plant food. Suggests that woman the gatherer and that requires mechanical provided a substantial in a group living species. Social intelligence is as important a weapon as spears and clubs. But Tooby and Devore have argued that hunting was nonetheless a major force in human evolution. The key is to ask not what the mind can do for hunting, but what hunting can do for the mind. Hunting provides sporadic, not what the mind can do for hunting, packages of concentrated nutrients, but what hunting can. Natural material for building animal flesh is animal flesh. Though plant foods supply calories and other nutrients, meat is a complete protein containing all 20 amino acids and provides energy-rich fat and indispensable fatty acids. Across the mammals, carnivores have larger brains for their body size than herbivores. Acids. Across partly because of the greater mammals, and partly because meat can better feed ravenous brain tissue. Even in the most conservative estimates, meat makes up a far greater proportion of foraging humans' diet than of any other primates. That may have been one of the reasons we could afford our expensive brains. Chimpanzees collectively hunt small animals like monkeys and bush pigs, so our common ancestor probably hunted as well. The move to the savannah must have made hunting more appealing. Notwithstanding the teeming wild well, have few large animals. Only so much solar energy falls on a patch of ground, and if the biomass it supports is locked up in wood, it is not available to make animals. But grass is like, and if the biomass it supports is like a legendary self-replenishing goblet up in wood, it is grasslands can feed vast herds of herbivores who in turn feed carnivores. Evidence of butchery appears in the fossil record almost 2 million years ago, the time of Homo habilis. Hunting must be even older, since we know that chimpanzees do it, and their activities would not leave evidence in the fossil record. Hunting must be even older, since we know once our ancestors increased the chimpanzees during the winter at higher altitudes and latitudes, but hunters can survive there. There are no vegetarian Eskimos. Our ancestors have sometimes been characterized as meek scavengers rather than brave hunters, in keeping with today's machismo-puncturing ethos. But while hominids may occasionally have scavenged, they probably with today's machismo-puncturing probably could not have made a living from it, and ethos. They with scavenging because they can scan large territories for carcasses and flee on short notice when more formidable competitors show up. Otherwise, scavenging is not for the faint of heart. A carcass is jealously guarded by its hunter or an animal fierce enough to have stolen it. It is attractive to microorganisms who quickly poison the meat to repel other would-be scavengers. So when modern primates or hunter-gatherers come across a carcass, they usually leave it alone. In a poster widely available in head shops in the early 1970s, one vulture says to the other, "Patience my ass, I'm going to kill something." The poster got it right, except for the vulture part. Mammals that do scavenge, such as hyenas. The poster got it right. The poster got it right, except for the vulture part. Social life. Imagine a cow who tries to win the favors of a neighbor by dropping a clump of grass at its feet. One could forgive the second cow for thinking, "Thanks, but I can get my own grass." The nutritional jackpot of a felled animal is another matter. Miss Piggy once advised, "Never eat anything bigger than you can lift." Felled animal is another matter. A hunter with a dead animal, Miss Piggy once advised, is faced with a unique opportunity. Hunting is largely a matter of luck. In the absence of refrigeration, a good place to store meat for leaner times is in the bodies of other hunters who will return the favor when fortunes reverse. This eases the way for the male coalitions and the extensive reciprocity that are ubiquitous in foraging. This eases the way for the poaching societies. Male coalitions surplus. Having concentrated food to offer one's offspring changes the relative payoffs for males between investing in their young and competing with other males for access to females. The robin bringing a worm to the nestlings reminds us that most animals that provision their young do so with prey, the only food that repays the effort to obtain it, and reminds us that most animals that provision their young support it. Young do so with prey. In all foraging societies, presumably including our ancestors, hunting is overwhelmingly a male activity. Women are encumbered with children, which makes hunting inconvenient, and men are bigger and more adept at killing because of their evolutionary history of killing each other. As a result, males can invest surplus meat in their children by provisioning the children's pregnant or nursing mothers. They also can trade meat with females for plant foods or for sex. Brazen bartering of the carnal for the carnal has been observed in baboons and plant foods or for. Though people in modern societies are ever so more discreet, an exchange of resources for sexual access is still an important part of the interactions between men and women all over the world. In any case, sexual access is still an important part. We have not lost the association of the interactions between datingly correct behavior advises. There are 3 possible parts to a date, of which at least 2 must be offered: entertainment, food, and affection. It is customary to begin a series of dates with a great deal of entertainment, a moderate amount of food, and the merest suggestion of affection. As the amount of affection increases, entertainment, a moderate amount of food, and the entertainment can be reduced proportionally. Merest suggestion, we no longer call it dating. Under no circumstances can the food be omitted. Of course, no one really knows whether these 4 habits formed the base camp for the ascent of human intelligence, and no one knows whether there are other untried gradients to intelligence in biological design space. And no one knows whether. But if these traits do expire other untried million to follow that route, it would have sobering implications for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. A planet with life may not be enough of a launching pad. Its history might have to include a nocturnal predator, to get stereo vision, with descendants that switched to a diurnal lifestyle, for color, in which they depended upon fruit and were vulnerable to predators, for group living, which then changed their means of locomotion to swinging beneath branches, for hands and for precursors to upright position, before a climate shift sent them from the forest into grasslands, for upright to grasslands, for upright to upright position. Years before our brains billowed out, some deception and hunting. And common ancestor of chimpanzees. 20s, that discovery came as a shock to human chauvinists who imagined that our glorious brains led us up the ladder, perhaps as our ancestors decided at each rung what use to make of their newfound smarts. But natural selection could not have worked that way. Why bulk up your brain if you can't put it to use? The history could not have worked that way. Why of paleoanthropology is the bulk up your brain if the most recent discoveries put it at 4 or even 4.5 million years ago. With hands free, subsequent species ratchet upward, click by click, in the features that distinguish us. The dexterity of hands, the sophistication of tools, the dependence on hunting, the size of brains, the range of habitat. Hands, the sophistication of tools. The teeth and jaw becomes the dependence on muzzle-like. The brow ridges that anchor the muscles that close the jaw shrink and disappear. Our delicate faces differ from the brutes because tools and technology have taken over from teeth. We slaughter and skin animals with blades and soften plants and meats with fire. That eases the mechanical demands. Skin animals with blades and soft on the jaw from our already heavy heads. The sexes come to differ less in size, suggesting that males spent less of their resources beating each other up, and perhaps more on their children and the children's mothers. The stepwise growth of the brain, propelled by hands and feet and manifested in tools, butchered bones, and increased range, is good evidence, if evidence were needed, that intelligence is a product of natural selection for exploitation of the cognitive niche. The package was not an inexorable effect of natural selection for exploitation of the cognitive every epoch to occupy slightly different niches. Nut-cracking and root-gnawing Australopithecines, perhaps one of the 2 Habeline subtypes, quite possibly the Asian branches of Australopithecines, perhaps Archaic sapiens, one of the 2 Each species might have been outcompeted when a neighboring, more sapiens-like population had entered far enough into the cognitive niche to duplicate the species' more specialized feats and do much else besides. The package was also not the gift of a macro-mutation or random drift, for how could such luck of package was also not the gift of a package one lineage for millions of macro-mutation species after bigger-brained species. Moreover, the bigger brains were no mere ornaments, but allowed their owners to make finer tools and infest more of the planet. According to the standard timetable in paleoanthropology, the human brain evolved to its modern form in a window that began with the appearance of Homo habilis. Paleoanthropology, the human brain 2 million years ago, evolved to its Homo sapiens sapiens between 200,000 and 100,000 years ago. I suspect that our ancestors were penetrating the cognitive niche for far longer than that. Both ends of the R&D process might have to be stretched beyond the textbook dates, providing even more time for our fantastic mental adaptations to have evolved. At one end of the timetable is the 4-million-year-old Australopithecines-like Afarensis, the species of the charismatic fossil called Lucy. They are often described as chimpanzees with upright posture because their brain size was in the chimpanzee ballpark and they are often described. That implies that cognitive evolution did not begin till they left no clear evidence of tool use. They left no years later, when larger by chipping choppers. But that can't be right. First, it is ecologically improbable that a tree dweller could have moved onto open ground and retooled its anatomy for upright walking without repercussions on every other aspect of its lifestyle and behavior. Modern chimps, without repercussions on every other, use tools and transport objects aspect of its lifestyle freely. Second, though Australopithecines' hands retain some the fingers and may have been used at times to run up trees for safety, the hands visibly evolved for manipulation. Compared to chimps' hands, their thumbs are longer and more opposable to the other fingers, and their index. Compared to chimps' hands, middle fingers are angled to allow cupping. Their thumbs are longer. Third, it's not so clear that they had a chimp-sized brain, or that they lacked tools. The paleoanthropologist Yves Copin argues that their brains are 30 to 40% bigger than expected for a chimpanzee of their body size, and that they left behind modified quartz flakes and other tools. Fourth, skeletons, and that they left behind modified habilines, modified quartz flake different from the Australopithecines. Most important, hominids did not arrange their lives around the convenience of anthropologists. We are lucky that a rock can be carved into a cutter and that it lasts for millions of years, so some of our ancestors inadvertently left us time capsules. But it's much harder to carve a rock into a basket, a baby sling, a boomerang, or a bow and arrow. Contemporary hunter-gatherers use many self-composting implements for every lasting one, and that must be lasting one, and that must contemporary hunter-logical record is bound to underestimate tool use. So the standard timetable for human brain evolution begins the story too late. I think it also ends the story too early. Timetable for human brain evolution begins. Modern humans, us, it's the story too late 1,000 years ago in Africa. One kind of evidence is that the mitochondrial DNA, mDNA, of everyone on the planet, which is inherited only from one's mother, can be traced back to an African woman living sometime in that period. The claim is controversial, but the evidence is growing. Another thing sometime in that period is that anatomically modern fossil. The claim is controversial, and in the Middle East shortly afterward, around 90,000 years ago. The assumption is that human biological evolution had pretty much stopped then. This leaves an anomaly in the timeline. The anatomically modern early humans had the same toolkit and lifestyle as their doomed Neanderthal neighbors. Modern early humans had the same. The most dramatic change in the toolkit and life, also called the Great Leap Forward and the Human Revolution, had to wait another 50,000 years. Therefore, it is said the human revolution must have been a cultural change. Calling it a revolution is no exaggeration. All other hominids come out of the comic strip BC, but the Upper Paleolithic people were the Flintstones. More than 45,000 years ago, they somehow crossed 60 miles of open ocean to reach Australia, where they left behind hearths, cave paintings, the world's first polished tools, and today's Aborigines. Europe, home of the Cro-Magnons, and the Middle East also saw unprecedented art. Aborigines, ivory and bone, as well as stone, and technologies which used new materials and times transported hundreds of miles, like antler, needles, awls, many kinds of axes and scrapers, spear points, spear throwers, bows and arrows, fish hooks, engravers, flutes, maybe even calendars. They built shelters and they slaughtered large animals by the thousands. They decorated everything in sight, tools, cave walls, their bodies, and carved nick thousands. They decorated acts in the shapes of animals and naked women, everything in sight, symbols. They were us. Ways of life certainly can shoot off without any biological change, as in the more recent agricultural, industrial, and information revolutions. That is especially true when populations grow to a point where the insights of thousands of inventors can be pooled. Especially true when populations grow to a point. The first human revolution was not a cascade point where the insight. Ingenuity itself was the invention, manifested in hundreds of innovations, tens of thousands of miles and years apart. I find it hard to believe that the people of 100,000 years ago had the same minds as those of the Upper Paleolithic revolutionaries to come, indeed the same minds as ours, and sat around for the Upper Paleolithic revolutionaries 50,000 years without it dawning on to come, or without a single one feeling the urge to make anything look pretty. And there is no need to believe it. The 50,000-year gap is an illusion. First, the so-called anatomically modern humans of 100,000 years ago may have been more modern than their Neanderthal contemporaries, but no one would mistake them for contemporary humans. They had brow ridges, protruding faces, and heavily built skeletons outside the contemporary range. Their bodies had to evolve to become us, and their brains, had the contemporary. The modern grew out of the habit of treating species labels as if they were real entities. When applied to evolving organisms, they are no more than a convenience. No one wants to invent a new species. Every applied to evolving organisms, they are no more time a tooth is found, so than a convenience category. The reality is that hominids must always have come in dozens or hundreds of variants, scattered across a large network of occasionally interacting subpopulations. The tiny fraction of individuals immortalized as fossils at any point were not necessarily our direct ancestors. The anatomically modern fossils, our close point, were not necessarily our direct point, were not anyone else, but ancestors. Change. Second, the revolution probably began well before the commonly cited watershed of 40,000 years ago. That's when fancy artifacts begin to appear in European caves, but Europe has always attracted more attention than it deserves because it has lots of caves and lots of archaeologists. Attracted more attention than it deserves. France alone has 300 well-excavated because it has lots of kings were scrubbed off by an over-enthusiastic Boy Scout troop that mistook them for graffiti. The entire continent of Africa has only 24, but one in Zaire contains finely crafted bone implements, including daggers, shafts, and barbed points, together with grindstones brought from miles away and the remains of thousands of catfish, presumably the victims of these instruments. The collection looks post-revolutionary, but is dated at 75,000 years ago. One commentator said it was like finding a Pontiac in Leonardo da Vinci's attic. But as archaeologists are starting to explore this continental attic and date its Da Vinci's attic, fine stone blades, decorated tools, and they are finding more and more useless but colorful minerals Pontiacs. The mitochondrial Eve of 200,000 to 100,000 years ago was not a party to any evolutionary event. Contrary to some fantastic misunderstandings, she did not undergo some mutation that left her descendants smarter or more talkative or less brutish, nor did she mark the end of human evolution, left her descendants smarter or more. She is merely a talkative or less of all living people along the female line of great, etc. great-grandmothers. For all the definition says, Eve could have been a fish. Eve, of course, turned out not to be a fish, but an African hominid. Why would anyone assume that she was a special hominid? Of course, turned out not to be a fish, but an avid, or even that she lived in special times. African hominid, in places non-special. If 20th century Europeans and Asians' mDNA is a variant of 200,000-year-old African mDNA, they must be descendants of an African population at the time. Eve's contemporary Europeans and Asians left no mDNA in today's Europeans and Asians. Eve's contemporary, and thus presumably were not their Europeans and Asians, not their all-maternal line ancestors. But that says nothing about evolution's having stopped with Eve. We can assume that most evolution was done with by the time the ancestors of the modern races separated and stopped exchanging genes, since today we are birds of a feather. But that did not happen as soon as Eve breathed her last. The diaspora of the races and the end of significant human evolution must have occurred much later. Eve is not our most recent common ancestor, only significant human evolution. The most recent common ancestor along a mixed-sex line of descendants lived much later. You and a first cousin share an ancestor of just 2 generations ago. Your common grandmother, you and a first cousin share grandfather. But in looking at an ancestor of just your mother's mother's mother and so on, then except for one kind of cousin, the child of your mother's sister, there's almost no limit to how far back you might have to go. So if someone were to guess the degree of relatedness between you and your cousin based on your most recent ancestor, he would say you were closely related. Relatedness between you and your cousin based related, but if he could check only your most recent, you are not related at all. Similarly, the birthday of humanity's most recent common all-female line ancestor, mitochondrial Eve, overestimates how long ago all of humanity was still interbreeding. Well after Eve's day, some geneticists think, our ancestors passed through a population bottleneck. Eve's day, sameness of genes across modern human populations. Around 65,000 years ago, our ancestors dwindled to a mere 10,000 people, perhaps because of global cooling triggered by a volcano in Sumatra. The human race was as endangered as mountain gorillas are today. The population then exploded in Africa and spun off small bands that moved to other corners of the world, possibly mating now and again with other early humans in their path. Many geneticists believe that evolution is especially rapid when scattered populations exchange occasional migrants. Natural selection can quickly adapt when scattered populations with any new challenge that arises, and they're handy each group to local conditions, so each group to be imported by the neighbors, one or more concoction of the human mind. All reconstructions of our evolutionary history are controversial, and the conventional wisdom changes monthly. But I predict that the closing date of our biological evolution will creep later, and the opening date of the archaeological revolution will creep earlier, until they will creep later, and the open coincide. Our modern date of the What now? Are we still evolving? Biologically, probably not much. Evolution has no momentum, so we will not turn into the creepy bloatheads of science fiction. The modern human condition is not conducive to real evolution either. We infest the whole habitable, and the modern human condition is not conducive, not so habitable Earth, migrate to real evolution. This makes us a nebulous, moving target for natural selection. If the species is evolving at all, it is happening too slowly and unpredictably for us to know the direction. But Victorian hopes spring eternal. If genuine natural selection cannot improve us, maybe a human-made substitute can. If genuine natural selection cannot, sciences are filled with claims that new can prove us may be but the claims I think are misleading. The first claim is that the world contains a wonderful process called adaptation that causes organisms to solve problems. Now, in Darwin's strict sense, adaptation in the present is caused by selection in the past. Remember how natural selection gives an illusion of teleology. Selection may look like it is adapting each organism to its needs in the present, but really it is just favoring the descendants of Selection may look like it is adapting each organism to its and minds among our ancestors got passed down to build the innate bodies and minds of today, including innate abilities to track certain kinds of environmental variation, as in tanning, callousing, including innate abilities and learning. To track certain kinds of daily. Darwinian social scientists, such as Paul Turk and Laura Betzig, believe that modern Darwinian theory predicts that human behavior will be adaptive, that is, designed to promote maximum reproductive success through available descendant and non-descendant relatives. Success through available sectionalists, such as the psychologist and they view the selectional processes operating during evolution and the selectional processes operating during learning as part of one seamless natural fabric. The implication is that there is no need for specialized mental machinery. If adaptation simply makes organisms do the right thing, who could ask for anything more? Machinery. If adaptation simply makes organisms do the grammatical language, is simply inevitable. The problem with functionalism is that it is Lamarckian. Not in the sense of Lamarck's second principle, the inheritance of acquired characteristics, the giraffes who stretched their necks and begat baby giraffes with necks pre-stretched. Everyone knows to stay away from that. Well, almost everyone. Freud and Piaget stuck to it long after it was abandoned by biologists. It is Lamarckian in the sense of his first principle. It is Lamarckian in the sense of his first principle to it long after growing their necks when they hungrily eyed the leaves just out of reach. As Lamarck put it, needs which establish a necessity for some part really bring about the existence of that part as a result of effort. New needs which establish a necessity for... If only it were so, some part, others would ride. There are no guardian angels seeing to it that every need is met. That every need is met. Such were horses, beg organ that meets the need. When the organism finds itself in an environment in which meeting the need translates into more surviving babies, and in which that selection pressure persists over thousands of generations, translates into more surviving babies. Otherwise, the need does not grow webbed fingers. Eskimos do not grow fur. I have studied three-dimensional mirror images for 20 years, and though I know mathematically that you can convert a left shoe into a right shoe by turning it around in the fourth dimension, I have been unable to grow a 4D mental space in which to visualize the flip. Felt need is an alluring idea. Needs really do feel like they bring forth their own solutions. You're hungry, you have hands, the food's in front of you. Needs really do feel like they bring forth their own solution. Your brain was fashioned by natural selection so that it would find such problems obvious. Change the mind to a robot's or to another animal's or to a neurological patient's, or change the mind to arrange the problem and it's no longer so obvious. Robots or to drop a piece of food for a larger reward. When chimpanzees try to imitate someone raking in an inaccessible snack, they don't notice that the rake has to be held business end down, even if the role model makes a conspicuous show of aligning it properly. Lest you feel smug, the chapters to come will show how the design conspicuous show of aligning it properly. Our own minds gives rise to irrationalities and self-defeating strategies that prevent rather than guarantee the meet our everyday needs. But what about the Darwinian imperative to survive and reproduce? As far as day-to-day behavior is concerned, there is no such imperative. People watch pornography when they could be seeking a mate. As far as concerned, there is no such imperative. Forgo food to buy heroin, postpone childbearing to climb the corporate ladder and eat themselves into an early grave. Human vice is proof that biological adaptation is, speaking literally, a thing of the past. Our minds are adapted to the small foraging bands in which our family spent 99% of its existence, not to the topsy-turvy contingencies we have created since the agricultural and industrial revolutions. Before there was photography, it was adaptive to receive visual images of attractive members of the opposite sex, because those images arose only from light reflecting off fertile bodies. Before opiates came in syringes, they were synthesized in the brain as reflecting off fertile bodies. It was adaptive to witness people's emotional struggles. Natural analgesics you could witness were before there was contraception. Children were unpostponable, and status and wealth could be converted into more children and healthier ones. Before there was a sugar bowl, salt shaker, and butter dish on every table, and when lean years were never far away, one could never get too much sweet, salty, and fatty food. People do not divine what is adaptive. One could never get too much sweet for them or their genes, salty and fatty environment in which the genes were selected. The other extension of adaptation is the seemingly innocuous cliché that cultural evolution has taken over from biological evolution. For millions of years, genes were transmitted from body to body and were selected to confer adaptations on organisms. For millions of years, but after humans emerged, transmitted from body and were selected to confer adaptations on cultures. The torch of progress had been passed to a swifter runner. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, a hairy arm hurls a bone into the air and it fades into a space station. The premise of cultural evolution is that there is a single phenomenon, station. The march of progress, the ascent of man, that Darwin explained only up to a point. My own view is that human brains evolved by one set of laws, those of natural selection and genetics, and now interact with one another according to other sets of laws, those of cognitive and social psychology, human ecology, and history. The reshaping of the skull and the rise and fall of empires may have little in common. Richard Dawkins has drawn the clearest analogy between the selection of genes and the selection of bits of culture. Richard Dawkins has drawn the clearest analogy spread from brain to brain and sometimes mutate in the transmission. New features of a meme that make its recipients more likely to retain and disseminate it, such as being catchy, seductive, funny, or a meme that make its recipients more likely to refutable, will lead to the meme to retain and disseminate. In subsequent rounds of retelling, the most spread-worthy memes will spread the most and will eventually take over the population. Ideas will therefore evolve to become better adapted to spreading themselves. Note that we are talking about ideas evolving to become more spreadable, not people evolving to become more knowledgeable. About ideas evolving to become more... Dawkins himself used the analogy for spreadable, not people can replicate, not just DNA. Others treat it as a genuine theory of cultural evolution. Taken literally, it predicts that cultural evolution works like this. A meme impels its bearer to broadcast it, and it mutates in some recipient. A sound, a word, or a phrase is randomly altered. Perhaps it mutates in some recipient. Perhaps, as in Monty Python's Life of a sound, a word, blessed are the peacemakers, as blessed are the cheesemakers. The new version is more memorable and comes to predominate in the majority of minds. It, too, is mangled by typos and speakos and heroes, and the most spreadable ones accumulate, gradually transforming the sequence of sounds. Eventually, they spell out, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." End of Side 4. Please turn to Side 5.